back to Sister Mary Corita,
Please.
née Frances Elizabeth Kent.
Thank you.
Maybe related to Clark Kent.
She's from Smallville, right? She's from Iowa.
Smallville, Iowa.
Yeah.
At 18 months, her dad moved the family to Vancouver, Iowa, to work in his brother's restaurant. And when she was around 4 or 5, the family relocated again to Hollywood, Los Angeles, California, America, the United States part.
States of America.
Her dad became a landlord of some property in Hollywood, and they themselves lived. I wonder if he allowed people to record podcasts in their parking.
I can't see that. You're recording the Shadow radio program in my undercarriage?
So they themselves lived in the heart of Hollywood. They were at 6616 DeLongpre, which is actually a couple doors down from DeLongpre Park, which is where that cursed statue of Rudolph Valentino is.
Right.
And strangely enough, right next door to a print shop, which is funny if you know a little more about her, which apparently everybody but me does.
As I learned that everyone else knows.
I learned I'm some sort of neophyte and I know nothing about art. Yeah, they were like right in the heart of Hollywood.
That's crazy.
Her family was pretty religious, so they went to the Blessed Sacrament Parish on Sunset, which is also where little Frances went to elementary school. But when she wasn't in school or church, she was just hanging around Hollywood. This was the heart of Hollywood, and this was like 1923 in the heart of Hollywood when like Charlie Chaplin and going around defining what movie making was, and then this little girl was across the street probably watching all of that happen. So like
standing next to Chuck Jones as he was watching it happen too.
She's trying to give him a Bible. He's trying to give her like a piece of dynamite
Like
or something.
He's chewing on a carrot.
Yeah. What's up, sister? I mean, she was like across the street basically from Charlie Chaplin's studio. So she was like right there when that was happening. But little Frances was more interested in making a different kind of art in the form of drawing and making posters, which her dad was thrilled about and encouraged her to continue doing it, which she did throughout her time in high school at the Los Angeles Girls High School, which is now Bishop Conati, Our Lady of Laredo near Koreatown. You're going to have to correct me on this Catholic
Loretto?
terminology. Yeah. It's pronounced Koreatown. This was also a Catholic school, but the younger nuns who taught there also encouraged her art.
Okay.
So when she graduated in 1936, she made the obvious career choice everyone expected her to make and announced she was becoming a nun.
Whoa.
And everyone was surprised by this, but it made perfect sense to her. Like, she was religious and it was 1936, and going to college to become a nun was a way for a woman to get a higher education in a time when not many women had that option. The school she chose was the Immaculate Heart of Mary, which is at 5515 Franklin Avenue, just below the American Film Institute, also in Hollywood. Or maybe Los Feliz?
I'd say Los Feliz.
Yeah, borderline.
Yeah.
Let's agree to borderline.
Well, you know what? Meet me on the borderline.
Meet me at the crossroads, which is where you should always put a church.
You should also do all your...
Just in case you're tempted to get really good at guitar. This was a pretty old order of Catholicism, and the LA chapter in particular had been around since 1871 of Immaculate Heart of Mary, but it was also kind of a liberal school as far as a Catholic nunnery can be a liberal place to be. In the school, she learned the usual nun stuff, but, you know, nunchucks, nun, the one letter on a dreidel that gives you nothing when you spin it. She learned this sort of stuff.
Nun is the loneliest number.
Second to none, which was the name of her study group.
Please keep going.
I want to think of more nun stuff, but I've got none. She was also able to take art classes, which she really enjoyed. One of her teachers who she loved there was Dr. Alois, it's a man, Schart, which is unfortunate, who was a German who had fled Hitler, but before he did, he was the director of painting at the Berlin Museum.
Wow, really?
And he came to teach at this nunnery. He had also helped put on the first shows in Germany of Paul Klee and Vasily Kandinsky.
Wow.
So he was like a big deal.
That's a big deal.
And she learned a lot from him.
For me to know those names, it's a big deal.
For me to understand a reference in the art world, come on. That's a crossover artist. She took a particular liking to medieval religious art, of course, but also of the modern art of the day, which at the time was the late 1930s, which might as well be medieval religious art at this point.
For sure.
She graduated in 1941 and became just kind of a rank and file nun, but in 1944 she was assigned to teach children from the First Nations in British Columbia, so she was back near Vancouver, until 1947 when she rejoined the Immaculate Heart of Mary, but this time as a teacher in the art department. So now she was teaching art herself at her old art alma mater. Alma mater? From Cars?
From Cars?
Your old car is called an alma mater. Meanwhile,
I can't even remember what Mater saying now.
Get her done? No.
That's it.
Your truck. No, what?
He has a saying. Maybe
he has a saying. The
hot
voice
potatoes.
says... That's hot potatoes
Hot
to
potatoes.
me. Meanwhile, at the same time, she began her master's program at USC in art history while also taking summer art classes at Woodbury, also classes at Chouinard, which is now Cal Arts, and also the Otis College of Art and Design. So she was just entrenched in learning as much about art as she could.
Yeah.
But in the last year of her master's program in 1951, she took a few extra credits she needed to fill because she had all of her required classes, so it didn't matter what she took. So just on a lark, she said, I'll sign up for this screen printing class. Why not?
It's an easy A, probably.
A joke skill to know.
She puts her sunglasses on.
Which have like crosses all over. Explain what screen printing is. You know
You
it.
burn an image onto a screen, and you put the screen on top of what you want the image to be on, and then you cover it with paint, and the image stays from what's been burned through. You do that to posters. You do that to shirts.
Well, that'll play into it. You could do it to anything.
Yeah, you could do it to anything. Yeah, it's really cool. I wish I was better at it. I took a class at Trade Tech. I got a B.
Greg, tell us about screen printing. Well, it's a skill I wish I was better at. I got a B. Most of her education in screen printing actually came from Maria Sodi de Ramos Martinez, who was a printmaker that had been married to Alfredo Ramos Martinez, who was a famous Mexican muralist.
Oh, wait, what was the name again?
She was Maria Sodi de Ramos Martinez. He was Alfredo Ramos Martinez. He was the famous Mexican muralist. So she was learning from
another master.
Basic like an artist.
Yeah.
And something about screen printing really connected with her. It was a way of expressing creativity, but it was also a sort of tangible skill that could be taught, which is great for her as a teacher at a women's Catholic school because she was able to teach these women a skill they would never have learned anywhere else.
And it's also a skill that doesn't require, like, you can go into it with an art background,
but
it's just a cool thing to know. It's a craft. It's more of a craft art.
Yeah, but also she liked screen printing. Let's just put it down as an art form. Let's just
go ahead and say it's technical.
Let's just go and say a child could do this. But also she liked screen printing because it was a way to make a lot of one design, which would not only make her art widely available to anyone who wanted it, but also it would be affordable because she could do it quickly, reproduce it quickly. So she liked how democratic screen printing was, and she was making her own art, and it was kind of interesting. Her early stuff was kind of like pop medieval art.
Okay.
Again, like it's impossible to explain art, but it was very religious and kind of two-dimensional, like the stuff you would see in the boring parts of a museum, but it had this 1950s flair to it where it felt like a modern retelling of something extremely old. Like the things you see of like baby Jesus like suckling on, and it's this weird like two-dimensional thing and there's halos around people. It would be like that, but like if it was made in the 1950s.
Right.
So it was kind of interesting in that way, but not that interesting because like I said, it's the boring part of the museum.
I would love it if you just described Catholic paintings all day.
I mean,
there's like a bowl of fruit, there's like a kid crying, there's a halo.
It's like a long panel of wood of someone's being stabbed.
Everyone's at dinner. This beard guy is in the middle.
The bad people have really big noses. I always get so annoyed in the Catholic
It's so funny.
There was one print she had done in her class at USC that she wasn't really happy with, so she decided to add color to it, and that was when a style was born for her. It was called The Lord Is With Thee, and it was exactly that kind of modern medieval stuff, but now it had this crazy color in it, and in 1952, she decided to enter it into the LA County print competition at LACMA, and it won first prize.
Wow.
And
First prize.
First prize. And second prize, we're going to put down screen printing again. This shirt that someone made.
You're rude.
Then she entered it in the California State Fair art competition, and it also won first prize, which I feel like you can't, most things say like if this is won before, you can't submit it again. So look, nuns aren't always the most honest people, which was nice, but she also wasn't trying to become an artist. Like this wasn't what she wanted to do. She was an art teacher who just liked expressing herself in that way. So she kept teaching and kept making things and finding who she was as an artist. And the next step came just 2 years later in 1954 when she started using text in her prints.
Yes.
So she was really into the written word and what words meant, but she also just liked the look of letters and typeface and fonts, kind of like you. Like this is your perfect artist. She's Catholic.
She's Catholic. She's alive in the 50s.
She wears a habit.
Back when being a Catholic was a bad thing.
So now her prints were mixing images with type. So she described it as the word becomes the picture.
Right. Learning letters was like, an owl, you have to draw an owl now. I'm like, I'll write an L. They're like, no, you draw the L.
I never had so much unlocking of the mind as I had doing research for this episode. But yeah, it is to think about like someone had to make an L at a certain point, and it had, like there's a reason it is designed. There were probably 40 drafts of what an L used to, what an L looked like.
Well, that's just two M's.
Sure, we all know the W is rehashing of two different letters, but
and it's not even a double U, it's a double V. I mean, come on.
Which is already a flipped over M, but okay. But then the 60s happened, and they hit her hard. Cue incense and peppermints.
You and I have very different references for 60s montages.
Mine is like the commercial hippie music, and yours is Kent State.
I took too much acid. Let's roll the tape, guys.
I was hired by Sony to tell people I took too much acid. That's my version of the 60s. Cue the monkeys. Can we cue the monkeys here? In 1962, she took her students on a field trip to the Ferris Gallery at 736 La Cienega, right by Melrose Place, which is another place that deserves its own segment someday in another episode, because it became an insanely influential art gallery. But on this particular day, they were having this guy's first ever solo pop art exhibition, and on display for the first time ever was these screen prints that he had done of cans of Campbell's soup.
You're kidding me.
This was Andy Warhol's first ever pop art show and the world debut of the Campbell soup cans. It was in Los Angeles, and Sister Corita was there with her students to see it.
Okay, now you can look at art. Please don't talk to the man. The man with the funny hair and the glasses. Please don't talk to him. He looks a little bit like Dr. Zayas from Planet of the Apes, which you haven't seen yet. But please don't talk to him.
You'll understand. Your kids are going to love it. She was
years.
also a time traveler. This was just an insane moment in history, and she was there. But seeing what he did with the soup cans of making the mundane commercial products of the everyday modern world into art unlocked something inside of her. Cue Anything by the Birds right now.
Cue a wimpy folk band covering Bob Dylan's charged political songs. Cue that.
Cue Bob Dylan's original version of All Along the Watchtower. She said that after the show, coming home, you saw everything like Andy Warhol, perverted. She started seeing things in the grocery store differently, and importantly, the city of LA differently. Right. LA in the 60s was becoming a billboard mecca, and seeing all these advertisements for different things all around town shaped the new artistic lens she was seeing the world through. But she wasn't critical of this commercialism. She was still a nun, so you can never criticize commercialism if you're a nun. It's one of the tenets of Catholicism. So what she saw in all this was a kind of spirituality in the commercialism. She saw that by showing you what people were interested in buying, billboards were carrying what the world loved, what they hoped for, be it in art or meaning or just to own, and what they believed in. Like, that's what she saw in a billboard. That's what she saw in Angeline's billboard.
This is her They Live moment.
Yeah. She put on her Andy Warhol glasses that he handed out at the show.
She fought Keith David in an alleyway. She put on sunglasses and she saw...
Wear them! Put them on! Put on the glasses! That was her fighting the devil. Yeah, she basically just looked at like, Comet! Wow!
Yeah, sink a coffee.
She didn't see them as ugly blemishes on the city, but as urban psalms for the modern consumerist world.
Wow.
She wanted to reveal the spirituality of the everyday by showing everyday items in her art. She said groceries became a revelation. The people coming out with bundles of food, it's all like a great ceremony, and the whole drudgery of shopping has become my inspiration. What this amounted to was her screen printing style with images and text combined into one thing was now going to focus on the blending of commercial advertising and spiritual beliefs, which is, these are like really big concepts.
Yeah.
Again, which is hard to to grasp if you're not looking at it. So just stare at some of Sister Corita's stuff, do a few more Hail Marys from our football segment.
What was our football segment called?
Tossing the pigskin.
Thank you.
It's impossible to explain, so I'm just going to give some actual examples.
Okay.
Her first pop work she did was the summer after she saw the Warhol show. It was a piece called Wonder Bread. It was splotches of paint in the colors of the Wonder Bread logo, but they were subtly shaped more like communion wafers, the original Wonder Bread. So it's the sort of thing where like I'll look at it, I don't get it, and then you explain it to me, I'm like, oh, that's on the nose, but also brilliant.
I love that. Yeah.
Another one she did used the slogan of General Mills. The big G stands for goodness, but knowing who this is coming from, the G also stood for God.
Oh, right.
The big G. But not just the actual slogan, she also started embedding quotes in the pieces from anybody you could imagine. E.E. Cummings, Walt Whitman, Lewis Carroll, Simon and Garfunkel, who make an appearance in our intro, the Beatles, the Doors, her own sayings, things her students says, Native American blessings, Camus, Samuel Beckett. She did another Wonder Bread one that had a Gandhi quote in it that said, there are so many hungry people that God cannot appear to them except in the form of bread.
That should have been a Wonder Bread ad.
I can't wait for Gandhi to sell out to Wonder Bread. She did one with the slogan for Del Monte tomato sauce. The slogan was, makes meatballs sing. But inside the word sing, she put a Bible verse about mountains and rivers exalting the arrival of God. And she said about it, if mountains can shout and rivers can clap their hands, then meatballs can sing.
Fair point. How can you argue with that?
You can't argue with a nun.
It's illegal in California.
So she kind of, like, from what I can gather, she didn't see it as literally,
Yeah.
these sayings can apply to the everyday.
She read the Bible, didn't take it literally, and understood that it's all just spiritual guidance.
Yeah,
and she's like breaking that down in a graphic pop way.
And it's also kind of a joke. Like, she didn't think the Bible was a joke, but like what she was doing was kind of playful.
Her output, yeah.
She did another Del Monte one where the ad said the juiciest tomatoes of all, and she wrote in it, Mother Mary is the juiciest tomato of all. So it was pretty cheeky, but it was also a way for her to shake up the teachings of the church and present positive Christian messages in a modern way through the vehicle of companies like Coca-Cola and Esso Gasoline and Canada Dry.
Yeah.
Just as Jesus intended.
Break down the density and unappealing nature of religious.
It's like 10 Things I Hate About You. I'm not going to watch The Taming of the Shrew, but I'll watch this movie with Heath Ledger in it. I'll watch this movie where Julia Stiles does horrific dance moves. And she brought this new, extremely cutting-edge art style to her classes as well. She started taking her students out around town to see the art in things like street signs and packaging in the grocery store. She would give them assignments like painting blindfolded, or she'd say, sit down, you have to draw 200 things right now. Or she'd say, sit down, you have to stare at your arm for 3 hours. Like, it was just these sort of, I hate to say it, unlock your mind.
Right.
Like, do this sort of thing. And her classrooms themselves went from a Catholic school art classroom to basically Andy Warhol's factory. The way they described it was just like random movies were projected on the wall and rock music was playing while everyone was just going around creating these crazy art pieces. Like, it was just sort of a free love sort of thing, but love in a different sense.
Yeah.
Two of these students were Jan Stewart and Gear Kavanaugh, who went on to become famous LA artists in their own right. She even transformed the school's annual Mary's Day celebration from what used to be nuns walking by in white gowns into pretty much any musical number from Hair, with like flowers and summer dresses and tambourines. Like, she kind of revolutionized the school. But as the 60s went on, as happened to all the hippies, even the nun hippies, peace and love turned into political activism. And living in LA, she was exposed to and made well aware of all the social and political issues going on at the time. And her art started reflecting that. She started incorporating into her stuff phrases like, why not give a damn about your fellow man and love your brother and make love not war. She did a piece about the Watts Uprising. She was very big on social justice and was vocally anti-Vietnam and police brutality, and supported the United Farm Workers Union, Amnesty International, the Women's International League for Peace, and the Physicians for Social Responsibility. She said, I admire people who march. I admire people who go to jail. I don't have the guts to do that, so I do what I can, which was her art. She didn't shy away from any of this stuff. She said, it is a huge danger to pretend awful things do not happen, but you need enough hope to keep on going. I'm trying to make hope, and you have to grab it where you can. She was seeing beauty in things nobody else was really seeing beauty in, and her work reflected that. While it addressed all these awful things, the underlying message was always still peace, love, and hope. And while she had no desire to be a celebrity artist, you can't be a radically political pop art nun and not have people notice
and not get a Vice article written about you.
People wanted her stuff, and since she was screen printing it all, she was able to provide that. She had her art printed on posters, t-shirts, book jackets, billboards, greeting cards. It was sold in galleries, church bookstores, and just by mail, because from 1968 to 1995, she had Corita Prints Inc. in North Hollywood. That was like a sort of warehouse that would print and ship all this stuff out. And then the commission started coming in. In 1963, she was hired to do a 40-foot tall mural for the Vatican Pavilion at the New York World's Fair. She did a design for Reynolds Aluminum, the IBM Christmas display in New York City in 1965. In 1966, the LA Times named her one of the 9 Women of the Year, alongside people like Ella Fitzgerald, Billie Jean King, and Mrs. Samuel Yorty, which I feel like probably shouldn't be there, but it was the LA Times. In 1967, she was on the cover of the Christmas issue of Newsweek and was also one of Harper's Bazaar's 100 American Women of Accomplishment. She did a lot of touring and lectures all around the country at this time. In 1966 alone, she had 150 one-woman shows across the United States.
Wow.
In just 1 year. She did almost 800 screen prints and thousands of watercolors in a few books like Learning by Heart, Teachings to Free the Creative Spirit, and The Artist as Social Activists Amid Adversity, How the Job is Done. And a series called Heroes and Sheroes.
Sheroes, I love that.
And she really was up there with Warhol at the time, who, by the way, loved her stuff.
Oh, really?
Because he was a Catholic guy who was kind of...
Say it like him.
I don't even know how... I am a Catholic. I am not a Catholic. But
I'm not a Catholic. I'm not anything.
He was raised Catholic, but also his sexuality did not align with Catholicism, so he was kind of torn within himself, and now he sees a nun sort of saying, like, it's okay to be this, it's okay to be free, so he loved it, and she was often on display alongside him and guys like Lichtenstein. Like, she was one of the major 60s pop artists, but back at the nunnery, she was made head of the art department at the Immaculate Heart of Mary in 1964, and they gave her own studio at 5518 Franklin, where she would work and teach and then live at the school just across the street. And that place is a dry cleaner now that was going to be demolished just a few months ago to turn into a parking lot. But in December 2020...
Los Angeles history, everybody.
In December 2020, it was saved from demolition, and now they're on track to get it protected status.
Oh, awesome.
But good luck with that. She was also in with the local high culture scene and was good friends with people like John Cage and Charles and Ray Eames.
Well.
And would regularly go to their house for dinner parties.
Those hot potatoes?
They served hot potatoes every night. She also started the Great Men Lecture Series at Immaculate Heart of Mary, where she'd bring in people like Alfred Hitchcock and Joseph von Sternberg. She herself was an influence of a one Saul Bass, who designed the movie credits for Vertigo, Psycho, North by Northwest, West Side Story, Big, and Goodfellas.
Big mid-century modern graphic designer.
And Big credits designer. But as we on this podcast know well, not everybody's for everybody. Some people weren't fans of Sister Corita.
Let me guess.
In particular, the Archbishop of LA, Cardinal James McIntyre, who was famously anti-civil rights and pro-Vietnam War, and he hated Sister Corita because she was so outspoken in the opposite direction. He called her art weird and sinister, and he called her lecture guests communists. So in 1966, he wrote to Immaculate Heart of Mary telling them to make her stop making art.
Wow.
The school fought for her because they believed in what she was doing, and also they were becoming more and more liberal, and that was accelerated when Vatican II happened, which is a crazy concept that had to be explained to me by Melissa.
Explain it to me, because I don't think I know.
I don't really know. Vatican II was like 1962 or something. They're like, okay, the Vatican's going to be more modern, so they changed some of their rules, like you don't have to go to purgatory, and babies can die and go to heaven still. Even the crazy thing is that they called it Vatican II.
Yeah. Sequels are big at the time. Isn't it weird that a bunch of guys can say that they're changing the rules of God and all the things?
But not all the rules.
They're making it up.
Not all the rules. You still can't be gay.
Try telling me that.
We tried. We talked with God. He wouldn't allow it.
He really wanted us to just hold hands and make out.
But in 1968, there was just so much awful stuff going on in the country, and this cardinal was so against her. And this Jesuit priest friend of hers had just gotten arrested for breaking into a draft office and burning the files with napalm. And she was touring and making art and teaching, and she was just exhausted, and she just needed a break. So she took a sabbatical in the strictest sense of the word.
Black sabbatical.
And she went to Cape Cod to get away from it all. But while she was there, she reevaluated her life, and she decided that she didn't want to be a nun anymore, so she left the order. Some say she renounced her faith completely, but we're not really sure about that.
Yeah.
But Immaculate Heart of Mary completely understood, and they themselves broke away from the Vatican in 1970 and became a lay community. So now the former Sister Corita was out of the church for the first time ever in her life, living in Massachusetts. Like, she didn't know how to cook or do laundry. Like, she was
usually God does this stuff for me.
I snap my fingers and there's manna everywhere. Oh, I got a stain. God.
Bing.
She was offered a job teaching art at Harvard, but she rejected it, just wanting to kind of do her own thing. Her art around this time became less poppy and a little mellower. Later on, she was commissioned to do some art for Hands Across America, but her two big things during this period were in 1971, she was hired by the Boston Gas Company to do a design on one of their giant gas tanks, and it became the largest copyrighted artwork in the world.
Wow.
And it was also a beloved local icon, so much so that in 1992, when they tore the tank down, people freaked out, so they put up a new one with the same design on it. The second big thing, and arguably the biggest thing she ever did, was arguably the smallest thing she ever did. In 1983, she was asked by the U.S. Post Office to design a stamp. It was a series of 5 stamps, all designed by different artists, all with the theme of love. On April 17th, 1985, the stamp was released, and since it was a love stamp, she wanted it to be unveiled at the United Nations. The USPS decided to unveil it on the set of the Love Boat, a decision that made her furiously upset, saying, "That's not the kind of love I meant. The TV definition of love is nothing very deep and everything gets resolved in an hour. I think it's dangerous to educate people that way, that love happens fast, troubles are resolved easily." So she refused to attend the ceremony, but hers was the most popular stamp of the series and was issued over 700 million times. You've probably seen the love stamp.
Yeah, I've sent out the love stamp on our postcards.
That's a different love stamp.
Okay.
She wanted it to be unveiled at the Love Shack.
Well, if you don't know, it's a little place where we'll get together.
Little place where we'll send our mail out from. Love stamp. Unfortunately, back in 1974, she had been diagnosed with cancer, beat it, then got it again in 1977, beat it, and then got it again in 1986 in the liver and couldn't beat it this time and died September 18th, 1986 in Boston. She left all the art she had left over to what was formerly her former convent and now known as the Immaculate Heart Community, which is now a Catholic middle school and high school that Katy Perry tried to buy and move into in 2013, if you remember that. And one of the nuns died in court arguing against it. In 1997, which is a completely different story.
Yeah, that's maybe an episode all on its own.
In 1997, they formed the Corita Art Center, which would go on to host Ada as an intern, which was meant to foster peace and social justice through art. They were planning to open up a new space there and have a show of her art in New York City, and then COVID hit, which is becoming a new saying in this show. But just a few months before COVID hit, the city of LA made November 20th Corita Kent Day.
Cool.
Sister Corita was as innovative and influential and forward-thinking and big as her contemporaries, but there seemed to be a few reasons why she isn't remembered as much as someone like Andy Warhol. For one thing, she almost exclusively worked in silkscreen, which is less regarded as a high art form, and also her stuff was very commercially sold because it was a silkscreen.
Yeah.
Second, she wasn't cool like Andy Warhol was.
Right. She didn't have her own Velvet Underground.
No, she didn't hang out with the
Doors.
She formed this band. It was not for everybody. They mostly played on lutes. And maybe most importantly, she was a woman, and not only she was a woman, she was a nun. Yeah. So novel though it was, she just didn't fit the image of what someone doing what she was doing was supposed to look like. Like, you did not expect.
Which is a shame, because now that I am more knowledgeable about artists and they annoy me, I would rather have a pure-hearted nun do commercial pop art
than
like the rugged loner. I think I'm just over rugged loners.
From now on, artists should all just have bags over their faces. But regardless, outside of the Corita Art Center, which has a huge collection of her stuff, you can see her art in the Hammer Museum, the Berkeley Art Museum, the Brooklyn Museum, the Fisher Museum, the Dallas Art Museum, Harvard Art Museum, Honolulu Museum of Art, Library of Congress, LACMA, the Met, MoCA, MoMA. Come on, everybody, do the MoCA, MoMA. The New York Public Library, the Philadelphia Museum of Art, the San Diego Museum of Art, the Chartwell Collection in Auckland, New Zealand. Pretty much every major city in the English-speaking world has some of her art in their collection. So enjoy your 15 minutes, Andy Warhol, because pretty soon the number of minutes you'll have left is none.